All right, so hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. We're diving into something pretty crucial today, something that's always making headlines and is a big deal for India, and that's the whole mess with our rivers and lakes being so polluted.
Yeah, we're talking about those big names everyone knows, like the Ganga and the Yamuna, even the Brahmaputra.
Right, exactly. Those are like the lifelines of the country, but it's not just them. Think about all those smaller lakes too, the ones that whole communities rely on. It's a huge problem, and we're going to try and really get into the nitty-gritty of it today,
Yeah.
all based on some awesome reporting from DTE, Down to Earth.
Down to earth. Yeah, they always get into the real details, which is what we need.
For sure. So that's our guide for today. So what we really want to do is figure out, like, what's at the root of all this pollution, right?
Right.
And then we're going to look at this thing called, it's called Interception and Diversion,
Yeah.
IND for short.
Okay, yeah, IND.
So we'll unpack how that works, what it can do, maybe where it falls short, and then to truly make it real, we'll look at some examples of how it's actually happening around India. So the big question for all of us, and especially for you UPSC folks out there, is how can India, with all this development going on, also make sure it protects its water? You know, it's a tough balancing act. But yeah, let's get into it. First off, just how bad IACMES, this pollution problem, what are we dealing with here?
Oh, it's pretty extensive, Like you said, those major rivers, the Ganga, Yamuna, Brahmaputra, those are pretty much, you could say, arteries of the nation.
Right.
But it's not just those, it's tons of lakes, too, places that are vital for local ecosystems and people living around there. What's kind of crazy is that a lot of our cities, they have those centralized sewage systems,
Yeah.
in theory, right? But they aren't really cutting it.
You'd think that'd be the solution, right? You
It
got the
is.
city, you've got the system. But from what I've read in DTE, it's not that simple.
Not at all. A lot of the sewage that's generated, even stuff like overflow from septic tanks, it doesn't even reach those treatment plants.
Seriously.
Yeah, instead it just goes straight into, open drains, streams, and eventually into those rivers and lakes we were talking about.
So it's just bypassing the whole system.
Pretty much.
And I'm guessing it's not just like your average kitchen sink water going down the drain.
No, it's way worse than that. It's a whole mix of stuff, You've got your regular household sewage, but then you've also got all this industrial waste. And that stuff can have, like, really harmful chemicals in it.
Yeah.
And then to top it off, you even get solid waste ending up in the drains, too.
Wow. Okay, so it's a recipe for disaster.
It really is.
And then, oh man, I bet the monsoons just make this whole thing a nightmare.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When the monsoon hits and you've got all that heavy rain, the drains overflow like crazy.
I can imagine.
And that's because a lot of the time, these drainage systems are just not designed to handle the amount of stuff that gets dumped into them during the monsoon.
They underestimated how much water would be coming through.
Yeah, exactly. And so, everything floods and you've got this polluted water everywhere.
Okay, so we've got tons of different pollutants and just huge amounts of untreated sewage.
Right.
And DTE actually quoted some stats from the Central Pollution Control Board, the CPCB, and they're pretty alarming.
Yeah, their 2021 inventory, it basically gives you this snapshot of what's going on, and it's not good. They found that India produces a mind-blowing 72,368 million liters of sewage every single day. That's MLD.
72,000? That's insane.
It is, right. But here's the kicker. The capacity to treat all that wastewater, it's only 20,236 MLD.
Oh, wow.
So you do the math, and you're left with over 50,000 MLD of sewage just going untreated every
Yep.
single day.
That's a huge gap. Okay, so we've definitely laid out the problem, and it's huge. But let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about what we can do about it. And that brings us to Interception and Diversion, or IND. Now, this is something that the Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0 is really pushing, especially in cities where those old underground sewer systems just aren't doing the job. So could you kind of break down what IND is trying to do here?
Sure. Basically, IND is all about catching the sewage before it gets into our rivers and lakes.
Makes sense.
It's like a quicker fix compared to trying to build a whole new underground system, which would take forever, right? The goal is to stop that untreated wastewater from getting into our water sources.
Okay, so IND, it's like a first line of defense.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we were to like zoom in on an IND project, what are the main steps? How does it work in the real world?
Well, the first thing you got to do is figure out what you're dealing with. So you do a lot of mapping and monitoring of the drains.
You got to find the source of the problem.
Exactly. You got to find those spots where the sewage is flowing out, the outfalls, and figure out how much pollution is coming from each one.
Okay, so you're basically making a pollution map.
Yeah, pretty much. Once
Yeah.
I've got that map, you can start building what are called interception structures.
Interception structures, what are those?
They're basically barriers or collection points that you build across those drains.
Got it. So you're blocking the sewage from flowing further.
Right. And once you've caught the sewage, the next step is diversion. You build pipelines or channels to move that captured wastewater away from the water bodies.
So you're redirecting it.
Exactly. You're taking it to where it needs to go. A wastewater treatment plant.
And at the treatment plant, they can finally clean it up, right?
Right. That's the last step. Treatment and ideally reuse.
Reuse.
Yeah, the treated water, it can be used for things like irrigation, some industrial stuff, even landscaping. It's about making the most of the water we have.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So I&D, it's not just about stopping pollution, it's also about using water wisely.
Yeah.
So what would you say are the biggest benefits of this whole I&D approach? Why is it becoming such a popular solution?
Well, for starters, it can really make the treatment process much more efficient.
How so?
When you collect the sewage in a concentrated way, it's easier to treat it properly at a dedicated plant.
So you're not trying to clean up the whole river at once.
Exactly. And of course, the biggest benefit is that you're stopping the raw sewage from ever reaching those water bodies in the first place.
It's preventative, not just reactive.
Right. And by targeting those specific discharge points, you're also cutting down on that non-point source pollution, which is a big problem.
Okay, so it's a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah. And another great thing about I&D is that it's pretty adaptable.
Adaptable?
Yeah, it can work in small towns with simpler systems, but also in big cities with those more complex setups.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It can be tailored to different needs.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the technical benefits, but what about the bigger picture? Like, what kind of positive impact can we expect from I&D in the long run?
Well, when you have cleaner rivers and lakes, everybody benefits. It's better for the fish and other aquatic life.
It's good for the ecosystem.
Right. You get healthier fisheries, more biodiversity, and when you stop sewage from contaminating the water, you drastically reduce the risk of waterborne diseases.
That's huge for public health.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's not just about the water itself, it's about the whole environment and the people who rely on it.
It's all interconnected.
Hmm.
Okay, so I&D sounds really promising in theory, but let's see how it's actually working on the ground.
Yeah.
DTE had some really interesting case studies. Let's start with the one in Ahmedabad, the Sabarmati Riverfront Development Project.
Oh yeah, the Sabarmati project, that's a good one. They built these interceptor sewers along both sides of the river.
Interceptor sewers? What are those exactly?
Basically, big pipes designed to catch the sewage before it reaches the river. And they didn't just build a few of them, they set them up at 38 different discharge points along the river.
Wow, so they really covered a lot of ground.
They did. And all that captured sewage gets pumped to these upgraded treatment plants located further down the river. So the result is that a lot of that nasty, untreated waste never even gets near the main part of the Sabarmati as it flows through the city.
That's a big win for the river.
Definitely. And it's a great example of how urban development can actually go hand in hand with protecting the environment.
Okay, so that's a success story from Ahmedabad. What about Coimbatore? They had a project focusing on restoring 8 lakes, right?
Yeah, the Coimbatore project, that one's interesting because they took a slightly different approach. They started by installing advanced screening systems at the lake inlets.
What do those screens do?
Basically, they catch all the big debris and solid waste. That stuff can really mess up the treatment process if it gets into the system.
So they're filtering out the big stuff before it becomes a problem.
Exactly. Then they use diversion channels to redirect the wastewater.
Where does the water go?
Some of it goes to regular treatment plants, but a big chunk of it is actually sent to natural wetlands.
Wetlands.
Yeah, they basically act like natural filters. The plants and microorganisms in the wetlands, they break down pollutants and clean the water even further. It's like a third stage of treatment.
It's like nature's own treatment plant.
Exactly. And those diversion channels also make sure that the treated water is released safely and doesn't overwhelm the treatment plants.
It's a really smart way to use natural systems to our advantage.
It is, and the results in Coimbatore have been pretty impressive. The lake ecosystems are healthier, the water is cleaner, and there's more biodiversity. And it's something we're seeing more and more, like with those projects around the Yamuna, nature-based solutions, they're becoming a big part of urban water management.
Okay, let's shift over to Bengaluru now. They had a project at Mahadapura Lake, which seemed to be more focused on that specific location.
Yeah, at Mahadapura Lake, they're using what are called hydraulic diversion structures to catch the wastewater before it reaches the lake.
Okay, and where do they divert it to?
They send it to a small, localized treatment system, a DWATS. That stands for Decentralized Wastewater Treatment System.
GWAS. Okay, so it's like a mini treatment plant right there at the lake.
Pretty much. It's a good option for places where those big centralized systems aren't practical.
So what happens inside the DWATs? How do they actually treat the water?
Well, they've got this multi-stage process. First, they have screens at the intake to remove any remaining solids.
Another layer of filtration.
Right. Then the water goes through these channels and culverts to sedimentation tanks, where the heavier stuff settles to the bottom. After that, they use an anaerobic baffled reactor, or ABR, and an anaerobic filter.
And those do.
Basically, they use bacteria to break down the organic matter in the water without needing oxygen.
It's like composting, but for water.
Kind of, yeah. And then, to really polish things off, they have planted gravel filters in those floating wetlands we were talking about earlier.
So they combine the high-tech with the natural.
Exactly. And to make sure the system doesn't get clogged up, they've also got box culverts and silt basins at the entry points.
It's a pretty comprehensive system for one lake.
It is.
Okay, so we've seen how they're tackling things in Ahmedabad, Coimbatore, and Bengaluru. Let's jump up north now to Varanasi and their efforts to clean up the Yasi River. What's going on there?
In Varanasi, they're using a combination of different methods. They have screens, diversion channels, and pipelines to capture the wastewater before it hits the river.
Okay, so the basic setup is similar to the other projects.
Yeah, but what's interesting here is that they're sending a big portion of the wastewater, like 50 MLD, to the main Ramana treatment plant.
Okay.
But another 30 MLD gets treated using a more advanced method called ozonation.
Ozonation, what's that?
Basically, they use ozone gas to break down those really tough pollutants that regular treatment might miss.
So they're bringing out the big guns for some of the wastewater.
Yeah, it's a really powerful technique. And they're also using those interceptor drains and sedimentation structures to manage the flow and prevent untreated discharge.
Okay, so it's a multi-layered approach.
It is. And they're even testing out bioremediation, using bacteria to help clean up the river.
Yeah.
The goal, of course, is to make the SC cleaner and contribute to improving the Ganga overall.
It's all part of a bigger picture.
Right.
Which brings us to the Namami Gange program, that massive national initiative to clean up the Ganga. DTE had a lot to say about the I&D projects that are part of that program.
Yeah, the Namami Gange program, it's a huge undertaking, and they're relying heavily on I&D to get the job done. In Uttar Pradesh, which is a key state for the Ganga, they've already intercepted and diverted wastewater from 154 drains.
154, that's a lot of drains.
It is, and they're doing some really impressive projects. For example, in Kanpur, they intercepted the Sisamau Nala, which was dumping a massive 140 MLD of sewage into the river. And then in Sultanpur, they not only built a brand new 7 MLD treatment plant, but they also upgraded an existing one to make it much bigger and more efficient.
So they're building new infrastructure and also making the old stuff better.
Exactly.
And this program, it's not just limited to Uttar Pradesh, right?
No, it covers a much wider area. Up in Dehradun, they're working on tapping 117 drains that flow into the Ganga via the Song River. And just in the last couple of years, they've launched tons of new I&D projects all along the Ganga basin.
Give us some examples.
Well, in West Bengal, they've got new treatment plants with I&D in Bali, Kamarhati, and Baranagar, and Howrah.
Okay.
Then in Bihar, they've got projects in Patna, Bhagalpur, and Saran, and more in Uttar Pradesh in places like Prayagraj, Jaunpur, and Etawah.
It's a nationwide effort.
It is. And they're not slowing down. They just laid the foundation stone for a massive 220 MLD I&D project in Meerut. So yeah, the government is really putting its money where its mouth is when it comes to cleaning up the Ganga.
That's good to hear. But, you know, it's one thing to have these big plans. It's another to actually make them work. DTE also pointed out some of the challenges that can make I&D projects tricky.
Oh yeah, there are definitely hurdles. One of the biggest is poor planning.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, if the interception structures in those diversion systems aren't designed properly, if they don't account for the amount of sewage and the types of pollutants, then the whole thing can backfire.
It won't be effective.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of treatment capacity. Even if you manage to capture and divert all that sewage, if you don't have enough treatment plants, or if they're not big enough or efficient enough, you're still going to have problems.
So it's like a bottleneck.
Yeah, and it's not just about the plants themselves. What happens to the treated water?
Yeah, where does it go?
If it's just dumped back into the same polluted channels or nearby water bodies, then you're basically undoing all that good work.
You're just moving the pollution around.
Exactly.
And I'm guessing money is a big issue too, especially for those smaller towns and cities.
Oh, absolutely. Setting up these I&D systems, it costs a lot of money. And then you've got the ongoing costs of running and maintaining everything. For smaller municipalities, that can be a real burden.
It's a major investment.
It is.
And it sounds like you need a lot of people working together to make this whole thing work.
You do. You need the government agencies, the industries that are producing the waste, and the local communities all on the same page. If you don't have good communication and cooperation, it's going to be tough to get anything done.
So it's not just an engineering challenge, it's a social and political one too.
Exactly. And don't forget about maintenance.
Oh, right. You can't just build it and forget about it.
Nope. These systems need regular upkeep. Otherwise, they're going to break down and the pollution will start flowing again.
So it's an ongoing commitment.
It is.
So, looking ahead, what needs to happen to make wastewater management in India, especially using I&D, really effective?
Well, I think the key is a comprehensive approach.
What do you mean by that?
We need to invest in expanding and upgrading our treatment plants. They need to be modern, high-capacity facilities that can handle the amount of sewage we produce.
And we need bigger and better treatment plants.
Exactly. And technology is going to be a big part of this.
Like how?
Well, with things like AI and GIS, we can monitor the drainage networks and pollution levels in real time.
So we can respond more quickly to problems.
Right. And we need to get the private sector more involved.
Industries.
Yeah, we need to encourage them to be partners in managing wastewater through things like joint projects, technology sharing, and financial contributions.
So it's a shared responsibility.
It is. And we can't forget about the people living in these communities. They need to be part of the solution.
They need to be involved from the start.
Exactly. We need to educate them, get their input, and make sure they feel like they have a stake in the success of these projects.
It's about empowering communities.
It is.
Now, DTE also mentions some important things to keep in mind about I&D, some limitations that we need to be aware of.
Right. I&D, it's a great tool, but it's not a perfect solution. One of the things to remember is that when you have industrial waste and runoff mixed in with the sewage, treatment becomes much harder.
It's not just about removing human waste.
Exactly. And even after treatment, there can be residues left behind that make it risky to reuse the water.
So it's not always perfectly clean.
Right. And then, if the treatment plants themselves are already overloaded, they might not be able to remove all the pollutants, even with I&D.
So the water quality might still be bad.
Yeah. So I&D is important, but we need to be realistic about what it can do.
It's not a magic bullet.
It's not. We also need to focus on preventing pollution in the first place, and we need to develop better treatment technologies.
So it's a multifaceted approach.
Exactly.
So if we had to sum up everything we've learned about interception and diversion, what would you say is the main takeaway?
I would say that I&D is a very promising way to clean up India's rivers and lakes. It's a scalable solution that can make a big difference.
By stopping untreated sewage from going into the water.
Right.
But it's not a standalone solution.
Right. It has to be part of a bigger strategy. We need good planning, good infrastructure, smart use of technology, cooperation between different groups, enough funding, and most importantly, we need to get the communities involved.
It's a team effort.
It is.
So, as we wrap up today's deep dive, here's a final thought for all you UPSC aspirants out there. Given what we've discussed about India's water pollution problem and the potential of I&D, what kind of policies and community initiatives do you think are most important for protecting our water resources and achieving those sustainable development goals? It's something to really think about.
Yeah, a lot to consider there.
Definitely. And remember, all this information is based on the excellent reporting from Down to Earth. If you found this deep dive helpful for your UPSC prep, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives on important topics.
Yeah, we've got more coming your way.
And feel free to leave your thoughts and questions in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you and keep this conversation going. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.